What's up, guys? So for the next director I wanted to tackle in a full-fledged ranking video, I wanted to go with another personal favorite of mine. One who started out rather small as a beginning writer in Hollywood to a man that has progressed to making some of the biggest films in the past decade. As I wanted to bring a little attention to the one and only James Gunn. James Gunn is certainly a beloved figure in the world of filmmaking. Okay, for most people. Unless if you love Zack Snyder's DCEU too much. But even outside the comic book movie world, James Gunn has really made a great personality for himself that I've always admired. Very passionate on so many different topics, quite personal with a lot of his movies, and just simply knows how to have a good time. I wanted to make this not only as a way to honor James Gunn as a director, as he's done way more than just directing. As on this ranking video, I'm not just including his directorial work here, as he has also written a decent amount of movies that range in quality, but are important to helping him shape who he is today. As a big way of celebrating Gunn's work, and to make this video not just talking about DC and Marvel for a majority of it, even if this video is also in celebration of him bringing the new DC Cinematic Universe into fruition, I have a bit of a bonus that I'm adding to this video. I'm going to include both the films directed and written by James Gunn. It'll make things more interesting. Besides, as much as I love the guy, he's not perfect. So I gotta point out both the good and the bad when it comes to what he contributes to the world of filmmaking. So grab your Walkmans and jam out to your own awesome mix, as these are the films of James Gunn ranked from worst to best. Let's get started.
Anyone know how many days it's been? I lost track.
43.
So, what might be the worst movie from James Gunn? You're probably thinking, there's not a bad movie with his name attached to it. Well, that's where you're wrong, because I picked some of his writing as a way to include some of his weaker work. Yet, the actual worst movie is one that he technically has his name as a director on. But before I talk about that, I want to briefly mention why James Gunn got cancelled.
Cancelled?
Now, some of you are aware that prior to joining DC and directing Guardians 3, James Gunn was actually fired from Disney for a brief period of time. What the hell did he do to lose his job? Well, this was all due to a few tweets that resurfaced on social media that got a lot of flack. Basically, there were a lot of tweets of him making some very off-kilter and risky jokes that didn't quite sit well with people. Now, I'm not going to discuss what exactly the tweets said, because I gotta be honest, even as a joke, they're pretty gross and not really that funny. It's actually fairly understandable to be weirded out by these tweets if you read them. However, this controversy didn't last long. James Gunn shortly was added to DC to direct The Suicide Squad, and still got to direct Guardians 3. So, why did people suddenly change their attitude towards this? Well, mostly because James Gunn, unlike other people who are called out for doing horrific or even simply problematic things, actually took accountability towards his action. Many people who have followed my career know when I started, I viewed myself as a provocateur, making movies and telling jokes that were outrageous and taboo. As I have discussed publicly many times, I've developed as a person. So has my work in humor. In the past, I have apologized for humor of mine that hurt people, and truly felt sorry and meant every word of my apologies. And you know what? That's something that actually makes James Gunn a lot more commendable. Instead of acting like he did nothing wrong and make horrible excuses, he actually admitted that those jokes weren't of the best of taste, and wanted to move on. People can grow and change, as long as you give them an opportunity to reflect on their mistakes, especially if this was something that happened long ago and was ultimately a joke. Granted, it still wasn't a good joke, but keep in mind, more offensive humor was widely accepted without people being as critical of it. And I think we've all done something that we thought was funny without realize it could be offensive to someone else. Don't act like you ever made some sort of risky, controversial joke only to immediately regret it years later. I think most of us have. And it's important to look back and acknowledge the mistakes as we move forward to make less mistakes like that in the future. So, with that, I have to say, James Gunn's mistakes was something that was easy to forgive, thanks to how he handled the situation with grace. And I salute you, Mr. Gunn. So, why the hell am I bringing this shit up? Because you have to consider a ton of forgiveness to James Gunn for the other biggest mistake of his movie directing career, which is movie 43. Now, some of you are probably wondering, what the hell is this? Or, why the hell is this movie even on this list to begin with? James Gunn had nothing to do with this piece of shit. Well, that's where you're wrong. Well, kind of, sort of. I'll explain right now. Movie 43 was a comedy that came out in 2013. It was an anthology film with various short skits, with a ton of high-profile actors doing various bits. Now, surface level, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? The problem is, well, these skits are some of the most unfunny skits you will probably ever see in a film, as it's some of the most degrading things you will ever see anyone with some talent be a part of. To give you an idea of what this movie is like, the first segment deals with Kate Winslet going on a blind date with Hugh Jackman. It starts out okay, until it's revealed that Hugh Jackman has a pair of balls on his neck. And that's it.
That's the joke.
It's not funny. It goes on for like a good 5 minutes of Hugh Jackman just having balls on his neck. And it's just gross. Yeah, the whole fucking movie is like this. Just a series of mean-spirited, disgusting, and not funny skits where you see talented actors do the worst bullshit. You know how there are some movies that are so bad, and then you see an Oscar-winning, well-respected actor that you are feeling bad for starring in something so atrocious? Yeah, this entire movie is just that. Like, how dare they waste future Oscar winners Emma Stone and Wallace Wells in this? They're talented enough actors to where some of them are trying, but even they can't handle this material. I don't want to discuss most of these skits outside of the fact that they're boring and unfunny. It tries to be edgy and offensive, but fails even in that department. I'm not entirely against movies that can do raunchy and not always PC things showcase. I still get a good laugh out of watching Tropic Thunder and Blazing Saddles. Yet, this movie doesn't even go all the way. It just feels surface level, with its way of showcasing inappropriate humor, leading to a movie that is not good at all. So, where does James Gunn fit into this? Well, the good news is, he's not solely to blame, as this movie was actually conjured up by the Academy Award-winning duo behind Green Book and Osmosis Jones, the Farrelly brothers. They served as the main producers, along with directors of a few skits. But this movie actually got a bunch of people to direct a segment for this, one of them being James Gunn himself. So because this movie, in particular, is listed as a film directed by James Gunn due to his segment, I am going to include movie 43 on this list. Thankfully, they saved his segment of the movie for last, and I mean dead last, as the movie literally ends and the credits roll, only for it to be revealed that there's one more segment. So that's a mark against this shit for making movie 43 even longer. Now, I'll give the movie this. This segment might be the best one. Okay, it's still bad because it's movie 43. Nothing good can ever come out of this. Though, at the very least, the segment does have kind of a fun concept, as it's actually
He's America's favorite cat.
a live-action animated hybrid thing with a 2D animated cat. It's about Elizabeth Banks having a feud with this cat, who is madly in love with her husband, and oh, jeez. Definitely not safe for work. The concept itself does have potential in a funny Looney Tune-esque antics sort of way. It having 2D animation is something that I like to admire more, except it suffers from the same issues. Too much mean-spiritedness and unfunny crude humor that makes this just bad. I'm sure if James Gunn was under the guidance of a better overall project, or maybe individually, this could have been neat, but as it is, it's just not worth it. I don't recommend watching this segment, and especially not after watching the entirety of movie 43. An absolute travesty of a film that unfortunately makes this list as the worst project James Gunn wrote and directed. You're honestly better off watching A Talking Cat instead. At least that movie is actually funny.
You can talk? But only once?
I don't make the rules, Phil.
Good, now I can never talk about movie 43 ever again. Anyway, for this ranking, to make things a bit more interesting, like I said, I decided to not only include the movies James Gunn directed, but also the ones he was known for writing too. Since Gunn wrote quite a few scripts, I wanted to honor some of them here, as some of them have elements of Gunn's later work, and even actors as well. This one being the thing he was known for before anything else. And that movie is, weirdly enough,
Ready?
yeah, Scooby-Doo. Before he became in charge of the DC Cinematic Universe, before he made the best Marvel trilogy, and even before he directed Super, he was known as the guy who wrote 2002's Scooby-Doo. A pretty infamous movie, as it's a film adaptation of a hit animated series. A genre of film that has plagued and caused a lot of infamy, especially for me, who usually hates this shit. Though to give James Gunn some credit, apparently his initial script was a lot different than what the movie ended up being. The initial idea was this was going to be the edgy Scooby-Doo movie with a PG-13 rating, and actually was more in line for fans of the original show, wanting a more adult take. Of course, the studio chickened out, and still ultimately made it a kids film. Not without some crude and risque humor here and there.
Hey, I can look at myself naked.
So thus, we ended up with the 2000 as hell live-action kids adaptation of Hanna-Barbera's most iconic cartoon character. An odd choice to talk about in the mix of big Marvel and DC films, but it was the one thing that James Gunn was known for a while prior to any of that. Plus, when else am I going to talk about this? I mean, I've grown up with this movie quite a bit, so it's been talked about a lot among friends, and I've seen it quite a few times, for better or for worse. So, is it any good? Well, not really. This version does have a strange charm, and I think most of its appeal comes from kids my age, nostalgic for the 2000s. This film certainly has an identity that can only come from a film of that period, with the soundtrack, fashion style, and just the amount of edge this tries to have compared to the original cartoon. Obviously not as adult as James Gunn initially intended, but it does a lot of edgy things for this cartoon. In this case, typical fart and crude humor. It's really not all that impressive nowadays, as this film suffers a lot from the lowbrow humor we get in some of these other live-action kids adaptations. Granted, this does serve as more of a satire of Scooby-Doo, but it kinda doesn't work as well, when they clearly should have. Not to mention, another staple of this era of filmmaking that plague a lot of these movies, like Scooby-Doo, was the CGI. These films rarely ever age well with their CG at all, and this film is no exception. It's a bummer, since the original idea was more puppetry, with an actual puppet for Scooby for this movie, yet the studio cheapened out, and we mostly get Scooby being this weirdly unfinished mess. And don't get me started on the creatures as well, oh boy. It feels like a bigger downside, as the film production itself isn't too bad. There's a lot of neat sets and costume designs that does make this look like it's a real location you would see in the Scooby-Doo universe. Plus, while Scooby's CGI is spotty, he's still voiced by Frank Welker, and he still sounds about how you would expect for the character. If there is something that does strengthen this movie big time, and the thing that I think most people associate positively with this movie is the cast. This live action version of the Mystery Gang tends to be very well liked. Well, for the most part. Fred and Daphne are a bit different here. Fred's a little more of an egocentric jerk, and Daphne does kung fu in this? Kind of odd, but they weren't necessarily the most fleshed out characters in previous adaptations, and I guess these actors do a decent enough impression of them. If anything else, at least this made Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr. get together, which is kind of nice. Though it's really Velma and Shaggy who are the main ones that are perfectly cast. Linda Cardellini is awesome as the lovely, geeky Velma, who's the real brains of the operation. She does a great impression and looks the part perfectly, so no complaints here. Though it is disappointing there's no lesbian relationship with her, but it's the 2000s. I shouldn't expect them to be that LGBT positive. While Matthew Lillard has now become pretty iconic for playing Shaggy. Like, I think this is the role people associate with him the most. At the very least, it's the role my generation associates with him, and for good reason, because this is a spot-on version of the character. The voice work, he keeps up with the same energy, and he does have a bit more of a likable presence compared to the rest of the cast. He was so good as Shaggy that they even got him back to reprise his role and voice work too. That's how you know they did a good job with his casting. It's stuff like this that makes it not quite as bad on the level of most of these animated adaptations, especially when they tried to make a movie that celebrates and makes fun of the original cartoon show, as they even brought back everyone's favorite character,
Puppy power!
Scrappy-Doo, the little sidekick that so many hated from back in the day, appears as the main villain in a weird CGI monster form. Yeah, spoiler alert if most of you haven't seen this movie by now. Overall, for being the first written project by James Gunn, it's not reflective of his strengths. He's not to blame, as the world wasn't quite ready for as edgy of a Scooby-Doo project, and instead we get a movie that started part of a horrific trend. It is better executed than a lot of these other movies, so it does come recommended a tiny bit in the sense that this is very much a product of its time sort of movie. It's a movie I do have a bit of fondness for in a nostalgic case, and it does have some weirdly enjoyable moments. But it's not that good of a movie for me. It does make me wonder what the initial movie James Gunn wrote would have ended up as. But we have better movies to talk about with James Gunn. I mean, it's not like he also wrote the sequel to this. Oh, wait.
Lucky for you, I'm a dog!
Yes, James Gunn also wrote the sequel, Monsters Unleashed. When looking at both movies, they're kinda about the same in quality for me. However, I think Monsters Unleashed does have a slight edge over the first film. It tries more so being a standard Scooby-Doo affair, this time having even more callbacks to the original series, with so many of the random ghosts they encountered in the series making a comeback. It feels more in line with what Scooby-Doo is, where the first film did have more of that edge. Yet this film isn't without its trends of the 2000s. Weird effects, gross out humor, innuendos, and even a ton of pop music, including a brief appearance from Papi Amiyumi. Yeah, you remember those guys, right? Kind of your typical sequel that does at least maintain some of the strengths of the previous film. Namely the cast being pretty on point, with Matthew Lillard, Linda Cardellini being the highlight still. Especially Linda Cardellini as Velma, as... oh boy, yeah. Yeah, she's totally the coolest. This is why she was perfect for Velma, and why we love her so much. No, seriously, Linda Cardellini is real cool. But this movie is just kinda meh. Pick your poison in terms of which Scooby-Doo movie you prefer. Would you want the one that's more basic, and like the show it's based on, just not as distinct? Or would you rather have the one that's a product of its time to a T, that goes a bit out there in terms of animated series adaptations? Either way, you're not going to get the best of James Gunn's work from just the kids' movies he's worked on. I always find it hilarious that Gunn was mostly known as the writer of Scooby-Doo long before any of the real big hits. Such humble and strange beginnings, but it shows how far he came along from working on these movies. They helped pave the way for these live-action adaptations of animated properties. Yeah, weirdly to my dismay, but at least Gunn managed to make these movies a bit entertaining. Or is it just nostalgic talking? Anyway, I think we need to talk about an actual movie that's more in line to what we're used to from James Gunn. Especially early day James Gunn.
You murdered him for that? Well, he murdered Bill Shakespeare? What?
The next James Gunn project I'm covering is another early work of his. Now, before he was even known for writing the Scooby-Doo movies, he originally wrote, before anything else, a little independent film called Romeo and Juliet. This is a film from famous cult movie director Lloyd Kaufman. Kaufman is famous for Troma Entertainment, a studio known for sloppy B-movies that are meant to be over the top and violent, with all their limited budget glory. Kaufman directed films like Toxic Avenger, and he also collaborated with Gunn quite a bit over the years. In fact, Gunn started out working for his studio, and since then, he has returned the favor, as every single movie of his has at least one brief moment where Lloyd Kaufman appears. Therefore, this makes Lloyd Kaufman probably the only actor who got to be in the MCU, DCEU, and AVGN cinematic universe.
And those toilets themselves came directly from the set of Steven Spielberg's AI. We got a good deal.
I take it he doesn't like AI.
Gunn's first real project was being the scriptwriter on the Lloyd Kaufman directed film Romeo and Juliet. This is a film that is exactly what it sounds like from the title, as it's just a modern day retelling of Romeo and Juliet. It has the same name and everything for the characters, just in the 90s, and they took some liberties with the writings of Shakespeare.
Romeo! Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Yeah, this is a movie that isn't for everyone. It's very violent, very obscene, and very edgy in terms of its humor. For as much as we love to praise James Gunn for his maturity at points, early day James Gunn had a strong edge, and it's in part to being part of Troma Productions. There's a lot of excessive violence and sometimes even questionable moments, with Sean Gunn looking like a creepier version of Helga from Hey Arnold, being way too creepy at points. Don't worry, you get to see him punish, maybe too brutally, to a point where this is very much a movie to where if you vibe with the more over-the-top and offensive type of humor better than others, you can see the appeal. Its low-budget feeling does have a charm, as they're aiming to be lowbrow and not impressive, but they have fun with it. It has those moments that get so weird and out there that you can't help but find it interesting to watch, especially when you see a dream sequence involving popcorn and pregnancy in a very bizarre way. See the movie for yourself for that shit. Far from the best of his career, it's definitely something that has an audience, but not for everyone. It's the kind of movie that is really made for the kind of people who get into these B movies, so it works for that. If nothing else, Lloyd Kaufman can also be thanked for letting James Gunn get his foot in the door, even if it was through Shakespeare being interpreted by farts.
The prophecy states that you are the special, the most talented...
I'm not sure he's the special, actually.
Out of all the movies James Gunn has a writing credit for, I feel this one ended up being the most fitting to discuss, as The Specials is probably the film that feels the most like a James Gunn project, despite him not directing it. I mean, how can it not? Since this film not only features his brother pretty prominently, but also James Gunn himself acts as a character in this. The Specials is basically a mockumentary about a team of superheroes and what their lives are really like. A very low budget film that definitely reeks of an early project from a notable director. To best describe it, you know James Gunn's later project, Super? The film that was constantly compared to Kick-Ass due to the fact both films had a very similar premise with how they handled a superhero story and came out around the same time. Well, what Super did for Kick-Ass, this movie does very similarly to the film Mystery Men. You know, that Ben Stiller movie in the late 90s about a team of superheroes that was the film where Shrek's theme song actually originated from? Somebody. It's a film that very much feels in line with Mystery Men. Yet, much like Super, it has enough of an identity to stand on its own. Mainly the fact that this is super independently made, with not a lot of set pieces, and with it feeling more in line with something like The Office. Hell, technically speaking, this might be revolutionary since this came out a bit before The Office. It's really just about seeing these superheroes live sort of this mundane life, and seeing the kind of funny situations they get involved with. It's not too special of a movie. This is still early day James Gunn, so he ends up being a lot more edgy with his humor with this, and that could be very hit or miss for some people. Yet, I think the vibe overall still manages to be entertaining, with these actors still working well with one another, and there being kind of a charm to its indie film. It's an easy watch, and I was able to find this fairly easy online, but I don't recommend it big time. At least not enough unless if you're actually a big fan of James Gunn, and want to be a completionist like I am. Ironically enough, the specials isn't all that special, but at the very least, it does give a good look at how big of a freaking geek James Gunn actually is. Heh, maybe eventually this guy could make movies for Marvel and DC. Oh wait.
So if you could be here around 9, that would be great.
Another project written by James Gunn. Only this time, it's one that actually came out by the time he made a name for himself. The Belko Experiment is the most recent solo written work of James Gunn without him directing. It has a pretty interesting concept, being about people at an office building job now suddenly being told that they have to fight till the last man standing. Kind of a neat idea, being a combination of Office Space and Battle Royale, as this big over-the-top brawl fest that's a survival of the fittest, mixed with an anti-capitalist message behind it. Seems like a project that should be great. However, it just ends up being okay. Not horrible, but I feel like for an idea like this, it had to go balls to the walls insane, either in a very satirical and comedic sort of way, or a super intense horror-driven kind of way. The movie tries to do a bit of both, and it feels like it struggles to maintain that balance. I feel like the threat of this movie should feel more impactful than it is, making it not nearly as intense as it should be, even with some decent violence here and there. And its humor, well, it sometimes takes itself a bit too seriously, making this not have as much levity as you want from a James Gunn project, making it not quite as engaging as it thinks it is. Not to say the whole trip is a downer. I do like the set piece itself being this giant office building, as an idea like that does omit for some fun social satire, which we still get, even if you might have to watch this movie on a streaming service with ads that try to convince you to work at an office job. Yeah, awkward. But it's not terribly directed or acted, with Scrubs' John C. McGinley being pretty entertaining as one of the lead villains, and even get both Sean Gunn and Michael Rooker playing decent roles, and even a compelling narrative to their characters. The downside is neither of them are in it for that long, which get used to that for Michael Rooker. It adds to another downside, as the movie does have a lot of characters, and I like the idea of multiple ones to raise the stake, yet they're not all that interesting, and I felt like maybe we could have gotten a better identity for all of the ones we mostly focus on. Would have made this a far more engaging watch. Yet, if you're looking for some decent violence, and even some humorous social commentary, you might get some enjoyment out of the Belko Experiment. It's okay. I just have a feeling James Gunn was too busy putting all of his passion on a less violent, more kid-friendly project around that time. But hey, maybe the next movie on our James Gunn countdown will have more violence that is worthwhile.
Any zombies out there?
Don't say that.
What?
That. The Z word. Don't say it.
So the next James Gunn written project I'm covering certainly stands out for a big reason. It's a movie that's a remake of an iconic classic with Dawn of the Dead. Definitely an outcry from Scooby-Doo, and one that might have some skepticism towards it. Especially when the arguably bigger standout is that It's from...
Why did you say that leg?
Oh yeah, Zack Snyder directed a movie written by James Gunn. But I do find it hilarious when all of these Snyder cultists will call James Gunn the devil simply because he's next to make a DC cinematic universe after Snyder. Like, bro, these two don't hate each other. They've worked with each other. At least, I don't think they would hate each other. I don't know them personally.
I'm sorry, Zack Snyder. I shouldn't be lashing out at you. Your biceps are the size of my head.
Yes, but so is my heart.
But yeah, James Gunn's early writing style is combined with Snyder's stylistic directing. On top of all of that, the director of Women Talking, Sarah Polley, plays the lead. Yeah, talk about a bizarre combo. You would think this would be dead on arrival, but in comparison to Snyder's other work, this remake actually has a decent amount of fans and positive reviews. It has its merits for it, as this is a pretty decent remake that does stand on its own as far as remake goes. Now, nothing can really top the original Dawn of the Dead. It was ahead of its time for being an incredibly violent film that helped excel the new genre of the zombie film even further, along with being this hell of an entertaining movie that's a blast. The remake is a decent retelling, this time with a bit more of a serious approach in comparison to the original film, which has its tense moments, but also has a strong satirical comedic edge to it. This remake is unfortunately missing that, but as far as being a grounded zombie tale, it does manage to be a solid horror film that does have some tension and grand spectacle here. Typical of a Snyder film, with the biggest difference of the zombies compared to the original is that it's certainly more of a fast 28 days later style of zombie. Yet the different style of movie mostly works, as this movie manages to be a good survival movie at its core, like the original movie, while still being kind of fresh. Much like the original Dawn of the Dead, some of the best parts of the movie is seeing these characters vibe and chill in the mall during their downtime. Yeah, you gotta love a sense of relief during the zombie apocalypse. It has some cool shots, and the script is decent, making you care enough about these characters. Helps that one of them is also good old Cobra Bubbles, aka Marcellus Wallace, aka Ving Rhames, who definitely is the best of the cast here. However, while this is better than a lot of the other movies written by James Gunn, this does feel more like a project with Zack Snyder's grill all over it. Not to say there isn't some connection to Gunn's other work. He does delve in violence, and the dialogue does have that edge to it that we get from his early days. Weirdly enough, this also has the same opening song that was in The Suicide Squad as the end credits song. Yet some of these aspects Snyder is also known for as well. However, not considered as good with it. Yet, this film managed to be a right amount of edge and extreme from both Zack Snyder and James Gunn. So much that, looking back at this film now, when we saw everything that happened regarding Snyder's DC universe, and even some of the backlash fans have for Gunn being the replacement, it's kinda neat to see something like this. People pit these two so much when, in reality, these guys, whether you like one film of theirs over the other, have, at one point, at least a bit of mutual respect for one another. They complement each other well on their project, and that are excelled even further due to the fact that they did manage to create a film that does work well with their strengths. It's kind of a shame that Zack left the DC universe, when maybe Gunn could have given him a chance to do another film or add something to this universe to collaborate. As much as people like to rag on them, I feel there were better things about Snyder's DC universe than some give it credit for, despite its flawed, and even if James Gunn did a better job with Superman. Oh well, it sounds like Snyder is having a decent time doing his own thing after being part of the DCEU. Who knows, maybe he'll have a chance to bring out some more original passion project that highlighted some of his strengths as a filmmaker even more.
All bloodlines lust for power. They consumed everything upon their planet.
On second thought, maybe not letting this guy direct another DC movie and replacing him with James Gunn was probably for the best. Next film.
I love the sexy slither of a lady snake. Oh, baby.
The first official directorial debut of James Gunn. Now we're getting somewhere. Like most iconic directors, for their first film, horror tends to be a very popular genre to have as your first step into directing. Gunn is definitely included in that, as his directing debut was the horror comedy Slither. Him doing a horror film of any sort is very fitting, as Gunn's really edgy side comes into fruition when he managed to make his films violent as fuck. A lot of blood and a lot of dismemberment that occurs in his films. Slither adds to that gorefest quite well, as it's one of those alien invasion horror movies. Not just any alien invasion, an alien race of small slugs that will go inside you and turn you into a horrible mutation, as it's up to Nathan Fillion and his crew to stop this grotesque threat. And the mix of Elizabeth Banks having to deal with her husband going through these mutations from the creature, as he's played by Michael Rooker, in another role where bad shit happens to him, in a film that knows pretty well what it is. A modern day B horror movie that isn't super deep, but is very entertaining to watch. What makes this film a fun watch is the over-the-top blood and guts we see that this film really dives in. Straightened mostly by some very impressive makeup work, it definitely gives vibes of other body horror type movies like The Blob and The Fly, with some really gnarly stuff. Yet, the film also has a decent amount of tension and suspenseful moments that are effective in being a horror film. We're still dealing with 2006 great effects, yet it's the creativity of these scenes and what happens to these characters is what makes it interesting to watch. However, the downside is that it's just kind of a fun horror movie. I don't think James Gunn went quite as good with his characters and writing here as he did with his later work. It's not terrible, and he's still great with actors. I mean, when is it not fun to see Nathan Fillion in a film of his? It's nice to see him be top billing too, as the guy has a lot of charisma, and even Michael Rooker plays it really well as this asshole character. Yet it doesn't go that far, with a lot of the dialogue and jokes being more seen as edgy, but that was definitely the time period that really resorted in that. I mean, it's 2006 after all, yet you won't find anything really impactful story and character-wise here. Basically, what I'm saying is that in terms of body horror films, there's not as much substance to this as something like, well, The Substance. Oh, and may I also mention that this is not a good movie for animal lovers. Not to spoil anything, but you're probably better off watching Guardians 3 again. Yet, despite being style over substance, Gunn still plays enough with the style here. He still utilizes good licensed music, and does give it a personality that we like seeing. It's just been heavily amplified more in future movies of his. Yet, for what it is, Slither manages to be well recommended. Certainly the right kind of horror movie loving crowd can appreciate a film with cool body horror effects and a neat premise that makes Slither a good watch. If nothing else, you can appreciate the Slug's cameo appearance in Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, that's a thing. Speaking of which, I think it might be time to start actually talking about the Guardians here. It's James Gunn's most successful film series, so I gotta start somewhere, but not at any of the films. Instead, I'm also gonna do something a little different.
That's the spirit. You'll be celebrating Life Day before you know it.
Okay, so I'm cheating a tiny bit on this one, as this isn't quite a movie in the traditional sense. But it does serve as a standalone thing that was directed by James Gunn. It definitely is more in the qualification of a movie than Peacemaker, which, I hate to say it, but that's not going to be included on this list here, because it is a show. Much like Twin Peaks on my David Lynch ranking, it wouldn't feel right to talk about it on a movie ranking. Though, it is a great show. In fact, season 2 is pretty good so far from what I've seen. Check it out. However, this will still suffice, as when am I ever going to talk about the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special? For what it is, it's a pretty fun time. A solid continuation of the Guardians series. The prep for Guardians 3 This does feature the main location within that film prior to the movie's release, and it's cool to see for the first time here. As for the special itself, it's a neat little story where Drax and Mantis are trying to find a gift for Peter Quill, who's a bit homesick for the holidays. The downside with this special is that you can tell it's a bit limited somewhat, like Rocket and Groot barely make an appearance in this. Gee, I wonder why. It's like it would be more expensive to have a fully CGI character in a 40-minute television special. And it's not really focused on the other planets, as we actually go to Earth in this one. Drax and Mantis are looking for a gift on Earth for Peter, and thankfully, in the form of humanity's greatest gift to mankind,
Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon appears in this as himself, and as expected, it's really funny to see him here. It works for the Guardians with how much they've built up to him over the series. And James Gunn worked with the dude quite a few times, so cool to see him be able to give a good performance again from something with Gunn's flair to it.
Hello, I'm the Batman. Hello, I'm Bruce Wayne.
Who's Bruce Wayne?
Oh, good old Drax. Hey, wait a minute! It's an overall fun Christmas special filled with humorous bits with Kevin Bacon, a heartfelt ending that actually ties into Guardians 3, and even a strange animation in the beginning that kind of parodies the Star Wars holiday special animation. It's a great Christmas special that I'm glad, for as minor as it is, James Gunn actually decided to work on it, leading to a very fun thing for the holiday season. Easily the best thing to put on during Christmas that's Marvel related. Along with Spidey Bales, of course. But, you know Mr. Gunn is known for more than just simple fun times. When given the right amount of budget and time, he can bring out something that's the pure definition of super. Well, not that super, but I'm talking about this super.
Home.
Well, it would have felt weird to not talk about the newest movie this director did when doing an entire ranking video on James Gunn. The one you can see in theaters right now, which this is actually the second time I did a ranking video where the newest movie I included was the one in theaters starring Superman and Krypto. However, this is significantly better than Super Pets. That's for sure. And not to mention most of the DCEU, as James Gunn's take on Superman is the perfect improvement of what a huge DC fan like myself wanted to see with seeing these iconic superheroes in a cinematic universe. And to think, all they had to do in the past 12 years was to have Zack Snyder let his writing partner from Dawn of the Dead take the reins of directing. Okay, I'm slightly kidding, as I don't even really dislike Man of Steel all that much. Far from a masterpiece of a movie, but it had at least enough of a decent setup to where I wanted to see how good they can get after that. Upon further reflection after 10 years of the DCEU,
Do you bleed?
yeah, it was time for a change. Although I have to admit, while I was excited for this movie, there was also a strong part of me that wished that James Gunn went a different direction than just going to Superman. Not to say that I don't think James Gunn couldn't give us a decent Superman movie, but after a certain movie on this list that we're going to talk about a bit later, I was under the impression that that was going to be the next step for James Gunn. His extreme directing style taken to the max, with more films that are unapologetically like his Guardian movies and his earlier work. But that wasn't the case, as now he's helming the entire new DC universe instead. Maybe not what I initially expected at first, yet knowing how much James Gunn is in love with comic books in general, he knows enough of what he's talking about to where he can bring a sense of passion and wonder to a character like Superman. as he definitely does with this new movie. Where Zack Snyder seemed like he loved more the imagery and idea of Superman, Gunn understands more of the characters of Superman more with just this film alone. This Superman is all about saving people, protecting the lives of the innocent, and making sure that evil doesn't take advantage of those in need. I love how Clark is portrayed here, and even though I still miss Henry Cavill, and wish he got more opportunities to stand on his own as Superman, David Cornsweet fulfills those tights incredibly well. He's given a lot to do, and a lot to emote with, making Superman feel more human than other iterations of him I've seen in the past. Hell, he even looks so much like Henry Cavill that I almost kind of see this as somewhat of a pseudo-sequel to Man of Steel, as not only does it improve upon what that movie established for a new modern Superman movie, but also cuts the bullshit, as this isn't an origin story by any means. Instead, it just lets you jump into the universe with these characters, somewhat already established in very quick ways. Almost like you're jumping into reading a new issue of Superman firsthand, which that alone makes James Gunn a good fit for DC, as this is a guy who knows how to embrace the crazy world of comic books by making movies that feel like it's these books coming to life. His Superman movie is visually awesome to look at, with a lot of great action set pieces, kind of in akin to Man of Steel, but a bit more creative and definitely more colorful, as we get a film with characters popping out of the screen with personality. We definitely get one of the best live-action portrayals of Lex Luthor here, being every bit of a despicable douchebag as we expect a character like this to be. Probably not quite as sophisticated as someone like Clancy Brown in the animated series, but fits the mold of modern-day whiny billionaire asshole that's every bit as awful as the one you see in real life. And yet, he still managed to somehow be cooler than Elon Musk ever will be. Rachel Bronson, as Lois, is also pitch perfect as the character, being a great support to Superman that does take a lot of initiative as a reporter for the Daily Planet. She's pretty much the perfect recreation of the version of this character we saw in the animated series. Not only looking and acting like her, but even kind of sounds similar to the voice actress in the original series.
So this guy just flew into Midtown and started attacking people, demanding for Superman to show up?
You want to keep up with me, you gotta be quick. I'm no tour guide and I don't hold hands.
This movie does feel like a proper adaptation of what I love seeing DC in animation form. And I'm excited to see what else they're going to do with this universe, just from knowing all the awesome stuff that we can see potentially adapted in a new big film series like this. Hell, we already got a lot of glimpses of that here, as we don't just get a good Superman movie, but also probably the best Green Lantern movie. We get Nathan Fillion as a Green Lantern, and he's every bit as perfect as you want Nathan Fillion as a Green Lantern to be. And that's not even mentioning the other cool characters who appear in this, like Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, Metamorpho, and even good old Crypto the Superdog, who are all really fun to see here. Though it does lead to my one issue with the movie, as the film does do a lot, setting up this universe within a film that's just shy of 2 hours. It can lead to it feeling a bit chaotic and overwhelming for some, as I do see maybe could expand it upon certain new things this movie introduced for both Superman and DC in general. However, this issue isn't a huge detriment to the film, as it's still bringing a lot of these callbacks and elements of DC in general pretty naturally, as this doesn't feel like they're jumping into creating this universe so quickly compared to the last DC universe, which that's a story for another day, really. It feels like it's all coming from someone who still loves these characters and wants to bring them some literal justice by giving them at least a bit of highlights in this. It's stuff that mostly at worst I just wish was expanded upon and got more of, which isn't necessarily a bad critique to have. Considering who's running this universe, I'm sure we'll get that. Plus, even as a James Gunn movie, he does also restrain himself compared to previous movies he's done, as this doesn't quite have much of the James Gunn tropes, like the overt violence, the constant reappearing actors, or use of licensed music, as his other movies have. I mean, they're all still kinda there, just limited in comparison. Like, this movie only has like 2 notable sequences where a licensed song plays in the background, where the average James Gunn movie has at least like 5. Yet it shows how much he wanted to be more focused on bringing us a good movie about Superman first, than being a James Gunn movie. And he definitely succeeded with that. It might not be the end-all, be-all blockbuster of Gunn's career. In fact, I can think of a few comic book movies that are even better than this from this decade alone. But as far as kickstarting a brand new universe for DC, this is a great start. As expected, this was the kind of movie that does give me hope for DC's future, after such a strange journey they had prior to this. Hope is what Superman is known for, and James Gunn brought that and some humanity to this new universe that we definitely need to see within our own. If you haven't seen this movie yet, it comes highly recommended, as this is the kind of movie from the kind of person that can actually bring justice to the Justice League. You did good, James Gunn. You did good.
We'll follow your lead, Star-Lord.
Biddable.
Standing up now. Bunch of jackasses standing in a circle.
If there's one movie that single-handedly made James Gunn the well-recognized name he is today, it's easily Guardians of the Galaxy. A film that, in the grand scheme of everything, changed cinema forever. Yet, you can see why, due to how good this movie was and still is. This is especially apparent when you consider how this movie was a game changer for the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time. Prior to this film, Marvel was starting to become the massive franchise it is today. But when looking back on these movies, Phase 1, in my opinion, is just okay. Most of the movies of that era aren't bad, but they follow a formula of superhero movies that seem more apparent now that we've gotten so many movies from the MCU. However, when Guardians of the Galaxy came out, it was kind of new and refreshing for Marvel, because looking at it from a surface level, this doesn't sound like the typical Marvel movie. A science fiction space adventure with unique planets and creatures based on a lesser-known comic book? This sounds less like an MCU movie and more like an 80s cult film. If Rocket and Groot were done through puppetry instead of CGI, it would be right in line with movies of those kind easily. Yet, rather than being a box office flop, Guardians of the Galaxy became a movie that everyone looked up to as a role model to how to create a fun summer blockbuster. Guardians of the Galaxy is a cloud pleaser in the best of ways, as it introduces a ragtag team of thieves and criminals banding this group that ends up single-handedly saving the universe. It is a bare-bones team-up movie, and still does have a lot of Marvel tropes that have been criticized, like an arguably overemphasis on humor. However, in this film, it actually works, because, well,
why would I put my finger on his throat?
This is actually a pretty funny movie. And it's mostly due to how snappy the dialogue and all these characters are. 2014 was the Chris Pratt renaissance between this and the Lego movie. Before he was Super Mario, he was Star-Lord.
Who? Star-Lord, man.
Though I find him to be a funny character. Sort of a nerdier wannabe Han Solo archetype that works quite well as a lead. Then you got Gamora, who's easily the most serious of the bunch, but works good as the straight man character who actually does deal with a lot of backstory surrounding her family. Plus, Zoe Saldana is ironically more popular in green than blue, as this is of course her most memorable role for me. You get Drax, who's pretty great. You would usually expect him to be the no-nonsense muscle of the group who takes things too seriously, but what makes him work better than that is that he does that to a fault. He is very literal with metaphors. He's a competent warrior character that's also very clueless about a lot of things, but in a more charming, naive sort of way. Dave Bautista plays this role so well, channeling overtly serious and comedic delivery. And of course, you have Groot.
I'm Groot.
What else can I say? We all love this tree, though easily my favorite of the whole team is the one and only Rocket Raccoon.
Ain't no thing like me except me.
A feisty little fellow who's great with gadget and is one big mischievous little guy. His snarky attitude gives this character an identity and is voiced so well by Bradley Cooper. Certainly his real best performance in my opinion. Also one of the best looking characters. Like, for a CGI raccoon, this guy still looks great today. I mean, sure, you can ultimately tell, but the execution of how he's textured and the expressiveness of his emotions is done so great here. Who said realistic looking animals couldn't showcase emotion? Certainly not the director of Iron Man, but James Gunn, he understands the assignment. In fact, for being his first major directing foray into blockbusters, he knocked it out of the park, giving us a visually awesome sci-fi film with so much color and personality to it. A good mix of new set pieces and character designs that really make this world alive. The action is top notch, the humor is a lot of fun, and one could not forget this film without mentioning the licensed soundtrack. Probably the biggest trend in Hollywood after the release of this film was more of an emphasis on licensed music from the past. Sure, arguably too many movies do it, and just do it for the sake of it, and Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't quite the first to utilize something like this. Hell, not even the first comic movie really. However, much like Edgar Wright, James Gunn is a music lover, and he knows what are the exact best songs most fitting for all the scenes in this. He has a knack for music that appears all throughout the trilogy. It's shown within the opening credit sequence alone, to Star-Lord dancing to Redbone. It summarized the movie you are about to watch perfectly. You can't open with something better than this, and it's one of the many reasons why Guardians of the Galaxy has stood the test of time within the past decade. Sure, you can argue it still stands as typical Marvel flair for some, and it's still just another big summer blockbuster.
That is true!
But also, every once in a while, there's a big fun summer blockbuster that just hits it right.
That is also true!
We got a good comedic alternative to Star Wars that nearly every movie tried to copy after this. Yet, none could compare to James Gunn's team of misfits. I say go watch it if you haven't seen it, but let's face it, you already have. Obviously doesn't stack up compared to his later films, but it set the foundation to what Marvel and blockbusters could be doing in bringing us a film from a director with a knack for talent like James Gunn.
Remember that Aisha chick?
Yeah, what? Oh, hell!
Shang-a-lang and the sha-la-la-la-la-la thing. Wham, bam, shang-a-lang and the sha-la-la-la-la-la thing.
In a strange turn of events, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 ends up being a much better movie than the first. It's crazy to think, because I remember when this first came out, a lot of critics weren't necessarily hating the movie, but there was quite a bit of word that, oh, it's not as good as the first one, fun, but doesn't have the same touch. Which, now honestly, I've come across more people who think this sequel is one of those movies that takes everything great about the first movie and ups it to a huge degree, me being included. The fact that this is already riding off the success of an already awesome movie is speaking volumes, as the film focuses on the Guardians learning more about themselves. We get a reunion between father and son, with Peter Quill meeting his dad, and a lot of family trauma comes up in more than one way. Alongside that, we get more of these characters being reflective about one another, as this is one of those sequels that splits the characters up so they can go through their own self-discovery. A typical sequel trope, but when done right, it can still be very compelling, as long as the character writing is up to that high level of quality that the previous had. Rocket certainly gets a lot more to him, still being my favorite of the bunch, with him having more time to reflect on his actions as a character. This rowdy raccoon does have some core emotions to him, and he's just a lovable, smart-ass troublemaker we love. Not to mention, he works really well with one of the biggest improvements of the first, Yondu. A really fun side character in the first movie that gets expanded upon big time, struggling with being a leader and father figure to Quill. He's a character that's also surprisingly has a lot of depth to him, and is played so well by Michael Rooker. He has the best timing in both badassery and comedy with this. The other characters also shine here, with Pratt and Saldana being a decent pair to focus on, though again straightened further due to another big character dynamic. Gamora has some good character moments with Nebula, really diving into their dynamic of being sisters and having to compete with one another, while Star-Lord and his dad Ego also add a lot to what being a father is, as this character is one gnarly antagonist. The first Guardian's downside was that it had a pretty straightforward villain, where here you get Kurt Russell playing an asshole father who's literally a giant planet. The shit they do nowadays, you couldn't imagine being done in like 2005 in terms of what audience can buy in a comic book movie. Also, don't want to forget New Edition Mantis, who I really am charmed by as this socially awkward humanoid alien character that has a peculiar way of interacting with others.
Then I'm certainly grateful to be ugly.
Is that what he calls it?
A very neurodivergent coded character that I always appreciate, and she works great with Drax, who I think has gotten even funnier in this movie compared to the first.
And you lacks batteries.
Harbulary batteries.
In fact, there's still some of that James Gunn edginess here, with this moment I love being for how I think a new generation of children would learn where babies come from.
Did you make a penis?
Dude.
How could he make a baby with your mother? He would smush her.
Also, this film looks fantastic. One of the best looking Marvel movies by far. They went above and beyond with the CG, which some could argue is overkill, but it's so colorful and has so much variety to it that it's hard not to appreciate a little bit. The music is just as great as ever, with a soundtrack that hits just as hard. You can argue certain moments are similar to the first, like the opening dance sequence with Groot, but all these moments are still fun regardless. Mr. Blue Sky is the kind of song that is perfect to open a movie with, and you can see the awesome craft here, especially with how each character interacts with Groot that represents their personalities perfectly. Plus, this movie does more original set pieces too, with some great action sequences all around, and is also straightened by the choices of songs here. It's a movie filled with so much action, humor, and even heart, with some surprising risk here. Spoiler alert for a movie that's 8 years old, and most have seen, but unlike most Marvel movies where characters die only to come back in the next movie, here we actually get an emotional character death sequence with Yondu. Okay, granted, not the most surprising character, knowing how much bad luck Michael Rooker has in James Gunn's movies. Yet, for Marvel standards, this is neat because we do get the emotional impact in an ending that actually tugs a lot at the heartstrings. A very personal feeling movie from Gunn with that moment alone. It shows that Guardians of the Galaxy 2 does have guts and managed to kill off a character without caving in by bringing them back, making this moment feel worthwhile. Okay, yes, Yondu does appear in Guardians 3, but it's only in spirit and to fill the quota of Rooker being in every James Gunn movie. So, point still stands. Either way, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is certainly everything a sequel should be. Improves the fault of the first, and expand upon these characters that we already love so well in the first. If you have by chance not seen this yet, it's highly worth seeing. It adds to this being James Gunn's most iconic trilogy that I feel every director should have under their belt. Edgar Wright has the Cornetto trilogy, Peter Jackson has Lord of the Rings, and James Gunn has Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh yeah, we'll get to the other film in just a moment, but for now, come a little bit closer and see what makes Guardians 2 an amazing sequel that can only be brought by James Gunn.
It's me, the Crimson Bolt. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Shut up, crime. Here's the Crimson Bolt. Crime.
All the fads and all the kicks of a billion years have come to this.
deal. Don't deal drugs.
Where a lot of people's introduction to James Gunn was through Guardians of the Galaxy, this was the film that introduced me to the mind of this crazy awesome director. As back in 2011, I watched a little indie movie known as Super, which was his second film after Slitter. Some of you haven't seen this or even heard of this. But just know, while I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone due to certain things I'll be explaining in a bit, but if this is the kind of movie that appeals to you in any sort of way, then you'll be experiencing one underrated piece of work from James Gunn. What's the premise? Well, remember the movie Kick-Ass about someone who decided to become a superhero in real life? Well, this is kind of the same thing, more or less. Instead of being a movie about a scrawny, nerdy high schooler played by Aaron Taylor Johnson being the one to take the helm of a superhero, we get Dwight from The Office playing a more mentally disturbed person who never quite had the best life despite how good of a person he tries to be. He's having marriage issues, a rough childhood, and is just conflicted in general about who he is as a person. He's propelled into heroism thanks to his wife's new abuser of a boyfriend, and through a vision from a Christian superhero played by Nathan Fillion, he gets the idea to fight crime on his own hands, and becomes a superhero known as the Crimson Bolt, in a movie that is very funny, but also has the most of James Gunn's dark, edgy sense of humor. And when I say dark, I mean it gets pretty dim. To give you an idea, you know how you watch something like BoJack Horseman? A great series that does go into these dark, uncomfortable places due to seeing questionable actions from even characters we find some admirable qualities to them? Yeah, this is that kind of dark, as there is a lot of this movie that might not be for everyone. And it's not just because of James Gunn's edginess that was more apparent in his earlier work, it's because of how raw and real these characters' issues actually are. To the point where certain moments, including the strange and extremely uncomfortable moment involving Ellen Page, and that's putting it lightly, where I honestly can't recommend it to everyone based on content alone. Yet, for those who can handle more extreme stuff in movies, if you look closely, you'll see a lot of the profound heart that James Gunn includes in most of his movies, very much so here. James Gunn writes these characters as very flawed and sometimes downright sadistic at points, yet he also gives them a sense of humanity that makes you interested in seeing where these characters will go and how they'll resolve their conflict later on in the film. You see a lot of his sense of humanity in a movie that does get dark and arguably mean-spirited, yet it still shines through here, not just through how James Gunn writes, but also how he directs. He gives this movie a great sense of style, even with as small of a budget as this does. There's still a lot of visually creative moments and neat set pieces that feel right in line with Gunn's other work. Hell, this even has one of his best opening credits of all of his movies, with a great animated opening that's probably the most fun this movie has to offer, but in the best of ways. I mean, what's a James Gunn movie without a great dance number? Not to mention an excellent cast as well, with Rainn Wilson giving a lot of range with his performance, as this character goes through a lot, but you can feel it due to how committed he is to making this character feel sad despite how troublesome he can be, and even how much he tries to be his best. It's a really great character that makes this movie very compelling, even adding in other stars who fit that mold here too. Elliot Page also appears in this as this comic book nerd who wants to help Frank on his journey to become a superhero. Even despite their plethora of problems, you see their dynamic quite well, and Page gives this character a lot of personality with their performance. Again, not a perfect character, especially with certain actions they've done, but the film is all about dealing with being a fucked up individual at points, and does delve a lot into these themes in a very personal manner. It's the kind of performance and character I tend to appreciate actors like Page tackling, and I hope with their recent resurgence as an actor, I hope we see more of Elliot in the future. Either way, this and Inception might be one of my favorite movies to feature the actor. Not just the leads, the film also has a ton of other James Gunn regular that are usually fun to see. These include Nathan Fillion, as stated earlier, Linda Cardellini, Michael Rooker, James' own brother Sean Gunn,
and Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon is included in this, and James Gunn puts him to good use with his first scene dealing with eggs. brilliant. Although as funny as that is, make no mistake, Kevin Bacon's character in this movie is straight up an asshole in this. Granted, Bacon plays it super well, just giving in to all these deplorable actions this character does. Being this incredibly egotistical bad guy who deals with dangerous illegal substances, manipulate women to do his own bidding, belittle other characters despite the fact he's straight up evil himself. Oh, and did I mention he's also really fucking racist too?
Hey, I didn't do that to her face, by the way. That was that fat down there, but I took care of him all right.
Now, on the list of things that are not okay, that was really not okay.
A hateable bad guy that works for this movie, even if it does add to this movie not being as PC for some audiences. Yet, for those who can handle stuff that's a little more risky, there is a heart and soul to be found in Super that is reflective of what the best of James Gunn has to offer, including a very bittersweet ending that could make even some misty-eyed, as it goes to real places of reflecting of being the best person you can be. It's not just a dark comedic indie movie with a few neat comic book elements, it also does have a genuine soul that makes it certainly Gunn's most personal film. If anything, I'm glad this was my intro to James Gunn, and I love that even despite how bleak this film gets at point, others seem to have saw it for being an authentic piece of work. I mean, why else did James Gunn become part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe shortly after this movie? With all that said, if you haven't seen Super by any chance, and you are the kind of person who can handle films with a dark sense of humor and story, then I highly recommend it. It highlights what made James Gunn who he is today. And if there's anyone who can make crime shut the fuck up in the best of way, it's definitely him. So take that for what it's worth. Going through all of James Gunn's movies again was definitely interesting, as it was also a way on figuring out which of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies ends up being the best in my view. Upon further review, I hate to sound like I'm resulting into recency bias, but Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 might just be the best one. It excels at all the other things that the previous two Guardians movies did so well, but to the nth degree, as Gunn wanted to make a finale to this trilogy that's worthwhile. Taking a while after the last few films, we get these characters in one final hurrah, where our favorite ragtag group of heroes are going through their own personal troubles. Particularly Rocket, who's now reuniting with his own creator, as we get to see more of his backstory and how he had a much more tragic life than we initially were led to believe. So now it's up to the Guardians to not only save Rocket, but all the other creatures his creator has captured, as he has one messed up idea being perfect. I've talked about this movie a couple times in the past, in small lengths, but I can elaborate a bit further on what else stood out. Initially, I did have some gripe with the film that could have been argued, but lately have been lessened upon further watch-throughs, as this might be a perfect trilogy in my opinion, quality-wise. But if you're watching to see the full story of Guardians, you can't watch the trilogy to understand everything. Since the Guardians are still part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Endgame and Infinity War came out a few years prior to this, there are things you have to have watched those movies to understand big elements in this. Namely the fact that Gamora doesn't quite remember Peter and is off on her own, as the original version was killed by Thanos, and now we just have a variant of her. It does add to this maybe be not as self-contained, however, it's not too big of a deal. The conflict of having Peter Quill move on from someone is actually something that's welcoming to see. It's neat to see a male character not be completely reliant on a love interest, and having to learn to move on when the character basically moved on from their own. Maybe a little downside that Gamora isn't quite the same, but it still makes for an interesting dynamic. Besides, I'm sure the whole Gamora thing was common knowledge for everyone seeing this movie. It's not like Endgame and Infinity War weren't the highest grossing movies of all time or anything like that. Another minor gripe I had was the fact that this does kind of separate the Guardians in this. But again, upon further rewatches, it's not as bad here. Namely because, for one, the stuff with the other Guardians is still compelling. Not just with Quill and Gamora, but also with Nebula, Mantis, and Drax, who all grow big time in maturity in terms of who they strive to be as heroes, while still maintaining those odd quirks that make them clash, but in an incredibly fun way. In fact, Drax is probably the funniest here than in all the other movies.
I made a poop shaped like a fish.
And the other factor, of course, Rocket really getting his time to shine as the hero this series deserves. This is ultimately his movie, with the backstory being pretty dark and emotional, especially dealing with these animal characters coping with their own deaths. It goes into that deep realm that gives it an emotional edge that I think some underestimate Gunn to have. But knowing his work in Super, it's clear that he does. I'm incredibly glad to see he was able to come across that so much here. And it really does make Guardians 3 the emotional song of the series. Rocket is the MVP of the entire Marvel Universe, and seeing him be the best handle here really excels at it being the best in the trilogy for me. Add in the other consistent factors of all the Guardians movies, the great soundtrack, the excellent visuals and production design, minor characters getting their time to shine like Cosmo and Sean Gunn, and a whole emphasis on animals that makes it a tragic but also uplifting film about animal rights. Even having a pretty damn good villain who I used to think was a little over the top, but considering what exactly he does in this movie, he becomes even more despicable in the right sort of way. So kudos for having James Gunn make an irredeemable bastard like this dude right here. It's a fantastic conclusion to the series, and that's something that really solidifies the quality of this movie and the previous films before it. Nowadays, movie franchises tend to go on for too long with a never-ending parade of sequels and spin-offs. Never do we get a simple trilogy of movies anymore that can stand on their own. But thank goodness Guardians 3 not only managed to make a set trilogy, but also a fitting conclusion that actually does wrap things up properly. Sure, it's still tied to the ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe, and not to say we wouldn't get any sort of continuation of these characters. I mean, apparently Star-Lord is going to return, since you can't get rid of Chris Pratt that easily, because, say it with me now,
he's so cool.
But in regards to this story and this team of characters, Guardians 3 ends perfectly. It's an emotional ride that can only be brought by James Gunn. In fact, with him leaving the MCU for DC, this is a perfect movie to end off his Marvel journey, as he ended his run on a high note. Can't say I'm that much more excited or have been super excited for Marvel recently, even though Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four were decent. But I can say with confidence that I'm happy that the last Marvel movie I was genuinely excited for paid off, thanks to the work of James Gunn, who I'm definitely going to continue to support. I don't belong here. And to think, all it took was for a right-wing mob trying to cancel him was the result to have him keep Guardians 3. But there's still one movie that went even further to what I hope and expect from a mind like James Gunn. A movie that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him leaving Marvel. But damn, is it not the best thing he has ever done. With the top spot going to... Oh, baby, this is what you call a movie. The Suicide Squad represents everything that made James Gunn the iconic director he is today. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Over-the-top R-rated edge, extreme violence, a ragtag team of imperfect misfits, animal characters, and probably the most comic book movie since Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I know I'm already going off, but hot damn, I love this movie ever since I first saw it. Even after so many years, it still holds up. This is unapologetically a comic book movie. And while the DCEU had its various ups and downs throughout its entire run, I would honestly say the whole universe was worth it for just this one movie. Going back to his R-rated roots of Slither and Super, and combining the ensemble cast of Guardians of the Galaxy in a film that really is the best of both worlds. It gives a lot of stakes with so many characters being axed off to where you don't know who might exactly survive. But it's so fun to watch thanks to the ultimate cast of Knuckles the Echidna, Peacemaker, Polka Dot Man, King Shark, Ratcatcher, and of course, this is probably the best we've seen Harley Quinn in the DC universe. James Gunn bringing this character justice is reason enough alone that it becomes the best movie he ever did. It's also another rich movie with characters who excel at being imperfect, and I love that James Gunn can do that with all of these movies, that I'm glad has become a consistent thing. Weirdly enough, with him being imperfect, it leads to more movies that are kind of perfect in my eyes. His rendition of the Suicide Squad, I couldn't see handled by anyone else, cause it's perfect for the exact kind of movie it needed to be. Especially since we don't have anything else to compare it to, as there certainly isn't another Suicide Squad movie out there. Not at all. Although, on the topic of perfection, I'm glad this has been a continuing trait on Gunn's filmography. Looking back, there's a lot of movies he was involved in that weren't that great, and even some mistakes he made in his own career and life. Yet, even despite his troubles in the past, the dude still made it big. He not only directed a few cult favorites, but also a new trilogy of movies that were considered some of the best blockbusters of the past decade, and is even now running an entire cinematic universe. I personally think it's well deserved because I see the growth of James Gunn as a filmmaker. Not just improving more on his craft, being able to bring out great blockbusters and indie darlings, but also thematically speaking, you can see his maturity in his films. He does a good job making characters try to cope with their own flaws and insecurities, along with trying to survive in a time that might even be dangerous. Yet, it's seeing these characters learn and reflect is what makes me come back to these movies. Fun movies on a surface that do have some genuine heart and character to them. Learning how you can be a good person, even if you're not perfect. From a flawed, mentally disturbed man wanting to be a superhero to the Man of Steel himself. James Gunn is really good at highlighting these kind of characters. He seems like the person who has gone through a lot and wants to let others know that you're not alone. Even though he's gone from comic book geek to big-time Hollywood director, there's a sincerity to James Gunn that makes me glad he's continuing to make films. I'll definitely be excited for whatever he has to offer for his DC universe. But until then, James Gunn is still one of my favorite directors, just for really staying true to himself. No matter how imperfect you are, you can still have those moments where you truly feel like the dog days are over, if you don't give up on your passions the same way James Gunn did. So take that for what it's worth.